Welcome to Salvage, a podcast for conversations with artists about the repurposed materials they use in their art practice. Please enjoy my conversation with Leticia Bajuyo. Through her large-scale works, Leticia engages audiences and connects with communities through her site-specific installations that involve community collections of media and memories. Leticia's drawings, sculptures, and installations highlight the impact of desire and the machines that create even more desire. Her interest in unpacking value perceptions find their roots in her autobiography, growing up biracial in a small rural town named Metropolis on the border of Illinois and Kentucky. The time and space of a quiet landscapes outside and the multinational dialogues inside of her family's house influenced the development of her critiques of consumer capitalism, fickle domestic desires, and the internalized pressures of assimilation. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me, Leticia. I'm excited. I am excited
good.
because I just recently discovered your work and you agreed to talk to me right away.
Well, I appreciate your work so much, and we get to meet at the reception for Plastic Culture at Chelsea Gallery and getting to show together, seeing your work get installed, but then also just the opportunity to be in that exhibition with Aurora. Anybody who's part of that crew, I would absolutely say yes to being able to hang out.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that is, by the time this podcast comes out, that exhibition will be down, but I'm sure there will be photos of it living online. I am so excited and honored to have been be a part of that exhibition. It's the stars of the plastic culture artist world.
Right.
If you don't mind, could we start way back when you were a kid?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Were you an artistic kid?
I think maybe on some level I was. I think I describe it as maybe a tinkerer.
Oh,
so
okay.
I grew up in Southern Illinois on the border of Illinois and Kentucky, tiny little rural town in the middle of nowhere. And then this landscape that my brothers and I have a younger sister, but she was like 5 years younger. And so my brothers and I were only a year apart. They're twins. And I'm the eldest. And then a year and 10 days later, they were born. So we're kind of raised as triplets.
Right.
And, so we were running around. We lived on a 15-acre property in the country.
Wow.
And being born in the mid 70s, it was pre-Nintendo, pre-VHS. And so we would just get kicked outside, but we're in the country. So we would just come up with stuff to do.
So you were like feral children out there.
Kind of,
awesome.
But it's still really polite feral children. Like we would come up with things, we would build stuff. And my dad is he's retired now. He's he's 87. But he's a retired doctor and he was a surgeon.
Oh, okay.
Practice. And my mom was a nurse. So come from a medical background, but at the same time, my mom was very supportive of creativity. And so she did some small paintings on her own. So she would definitely welcome it. Mm-hmm. But I think that there was something in the water combined with my dad's. I have no idea if there's any truth to this, but one of my theories is that his ability to do surgery and to understand like the human body three-dimensionally on the inside, you have to understand three-dimensional space.
Right.
And function, how the body functions, how the body is designed, how designs change. My brothers and I, all three of us are designers.
Oh. Interesting.
So I went on into art and sculpture. One of my brothers, the other one is an architect and furniture designer.
Wow.
And continues to work independently now because he's a stay-at-home dad of 5 kids. So,
oh my gosh, wow.
Very, very creative in other ways.
Yes.
But trained as an architect. And then my other brother, he is a mechanical engineer.
Oh, okay.
And so
I have to say you probably are pretty good at math.
Pretty good at math. We definitely like math. I love math. And I try to communicate that to my own child, my own daughter, as well as to my students. I have students that walk in the door and they're like, I hate math. They freak out. But
Me.
You too. Well, so And then with that, I also talk about like physical math. So I tell my students, we're going to do physical math. They're like, what? I was like, okay, how big around do you want the sculpture? And they're like, this big. And then I was like, don't freak out. Close your eyes if you want. I was like, I take a tape measure out.
So funny enough, I can do that. And I don't know if it's because I studied pattern making and my first career was in fashion. So I can measure
Mm-hmm.
things and I can figure out things. I can have a ruler standing by and do all that. But you put me into a math class and I will cry.
Oh,
No,
you just,
I vividly remember myself crying in middle school in math class just because I
mm-hmm.
couldn't comprehend the math problems themselves. And,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I was also told that, I wasn't good at math. That didn't help it.
Right. No, I think, fear and statements like that can end up creating like this attitude where then we put a block on it. And
Mm,
so not to say that your teachers were bad, but maybe it wasn't the right teacher at the time.
right.
And then I think about like for me, geometry and trig and physics were my favorites.
See, geometry was okay. And
Well, because it's
luckily that
visual.
was the last requirement. So I think
Mm,
I finished okay, just barely okay. But after that, I was like, okay, I never have to do math ever again.
yeah, yeah. But I think, the ones that I know I gravitated towards were the ones where there was problem solving. Like
Mhm.
you could, like you could figure it out, and you could also figure it out backwards. And so I think that relates back to my own creativity. I like to take things apart when I was
Ah,
little, and then put things back together, see how things would work, and then we would build things all the time, and then take it apart after we
mhm.
built them. And so I think there was something to the tinkering about creativity and problem solving that I didn't necessarily call it art because I didn't go to an art museum until I was 18.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And but I fortunately had a wonderful high school art teacher who is
Ah.
still a good friend. We're still connected on Facebook and Instagram.
Oh, that's
And
so great.
yeah, yeah. And so that those kind of people make a difference.
Yes. Oh, yes,
Along
they do.
the
The
way.
right teacher definitely makes a difference. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So you studied sculpture for your BFA then?
Yes and no. I went to Notre Dame for my
Uh-huh.
undergrad. My parents were really hoping for biochem. I wasn't. So I would sneak over and take art classes, and it ended up developing. So I majored. I started off as a major in BFA 2D. So at Notre Dame, at least back then in the 90s, there it was like I was there a student in 94 to 98. You could either be the 2D BFA student or a 3D. So 3D was like ceramics and sculpture.
Okay.
2D be painting, photography, printmaking, drawing was like one of the BFAs. So I thought that's what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
And I went down that path. I still do a lot of drawing today, but I found my voice in sculpture.
Oh, interesting. So
Yeah.
were you making like traditional type of sculpture? More or
Mm,
less like clay and I don't know, wood, marble, whatever. What is traditional sculpture these days?
right. Anyway, well, that's the thing that I love about sculpture. I think so when I was an undergrad, I was struggling a little bit to kind of find that voice within my work because I think the thing that I struggled with 2D was I had a vision of what it was supposed to look like, and it wasn't quite measuring up. And I felt like I had to know all of the parts of it, and they ended up becoming sort of static. But then when I would go to take these classes across the liberal arts program at Notre Dame and take things like philosophy of democracy and making a multicultural America, information, what was it, management? Oh, I'm trying to remember the name of the class. Organizational communication. It was an
Oh,
MBA
wow.
class. Like those courses I found fascinating. And
Huh.
I could poke all these questions. But then when I would get into the studio classroom, I would wait for the professor to get it started
Oh,
and
interesting.
put the still life up, select the figure that we were going to sculpt. And
Mhm.
so it was a way to make, but I was not finding a way to bring the ideation and the making they weren't hitting. Uh,
Mm.
so I actually dropped my BFA to a BA in a liberal arts, which both are great degrees, but
Yeah.
my parents, I remember my parents, they're like, we don't know about the art thing, but you at least do the big one. You do the one that seems like more important. And so I was like, well, I just couldn't envision myself doing a thesis show when
Oh, Interesting.
I couldn't, I'd see my classmates make these great ideas and jumps and were really passionate about what they were doing. And I just couldn't, I didn't understand that the work that I was doing was work about not having confidence or not having an idea. So I didn't understand the terminology of the work I was doing. And I hadn't looked at enough things, enough other artists. So dropped my major to a liberal arts BA at Notre Dame, which then required you to take all of the first level classes. And the BFA 2D did not require sculpture, but the BA did require sculpture. And I was one class from being able to graduate early because I'd taken so many classes along the way. I had to take sculpture. My senior year, fall semester, I took sculpture, like my first sculpture class, and it was like the sky opened up. And metaphor all of a sudden made sense. I was like, oh my gosh, you don't have to like draw the thing to look like the thing. You could just use the thing.
Right. No,
Right?
That's so
Put the
exciting.
thing in the, I was like, that counts. You know, so we're looking at like artists like Anne Hamilton and Felix Gonzalez Torres and seeing like the way that he would create with like just a, you know, a portrait through candy, or she would utilize like tearings of a book or, you know, clothes, like how that could communicate through the object. You know, I was just like on fire. And so all of the things I've been thinking about in those other like philosophy-based classes, all of a sudden I could use that and not have to answer it like in a illustrated vision, but I could actually pose the question through the materiality.
Oh,
it's like,
I love that.
That goes back to that tinkering part where like through the object, I could like undo the idea and put the new idea back together, whether it had mechanical components or was just a pile.
Right. Oh, that's exciting.
And so,
wow.
Yeah, it all bled together. And so I was doing maybe traditional work in that I was learning how to do welding and woodworking, traditional fabrication and casting. But my favorite part about sculpture is that what we do in plastic, you know, that counts. You could hot glue gummy bears or you could carve marble, right? All of that is under the umbrella of sculpture.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's
cool. So that led to my BFA thesis of in sculpture, and then went on to an MFA in sculpture at Tennessee Knoxville.
Oh, wow. And then how did you, when you finished your MFA, did you start working in the art world and making your installations right away? Did you like figure out these large community component installations while you were doing your MFA?
A little bit, yeah. So there's definitely some components of that in the BFA and MFA both. My thesis show in undergrad, we had been going to this junkyard to get all these little slugs of metal that were cutouts from a machine that was die punching out these components that was then creating engine blocks out of the parts that they did need. So they had piles of this junkyard of all the leftovers. And I remember we had to go there and we were supposed to weld them together. And so I did that, but then I felt so much empathy for these little pieces of metal that were not wanted. Right? It's not its fault that it was like 1 inch over from the part that was needed. It was but the thing to work, it had to be removed. And so they eventually get melted down. And so thinking about that for my thesis show, I ended up going back to the junkyard time and time again to get buckets of this one specific size of slug of punch out, and then cleaned them all. And then I created a performance piece that stacked them into the shape of boat forms that would then collapse. And then I'd restack it. And so and then in the end, I took all those pieces back to the junkyard and they got, sold back for like a quarter. I got like a fourth of what I bought them for because it weighs that differently with buying versus selling. I have all the receipts on both, from that to this day. And so they hang on a bulletin board in my at my home studio.
Oh, I love that. There's a performance and an installation and those receipts right there, right?
Right. Like I have like 5 slugs I kept and then the rest of them, and then I have these receipts, but I borrowed that metal from the waste stream or from the recycling stream of metal and then putting it back in, giving it a different moment, of life. And so that same attitude, I think, has been in my work in graduate school and then since, but just the materials shift. And so sometimes it still is metal, sometimes it's plastic like the CDs. And so it ebbs and flows. But yeah, I started doing installation work when I was in grad school, following that exploration into like the slugs and the materiality, the installation of that piece in undergrad, but then grad school using styrofoam peanuts. I did a lot of salvage stuff, styrofoam peanuts and salvage cardboard. But then also my thesis show was more traditional materials, mostly like cast fiberglass, cast bronze, fabricated steel, and fabricated wood to make these kneelers that held water. And they all had
kneelers.
Like kind of like a spiritual kneeler, like at church.
Oh, okay. So like something to rest your knees on.
Yes. So like
okay.
if you were going to pray at church, you would sit there, like you would kneel at this. And so it had a sink in it. And so it was a basin, and there was actually a soap dish, and it had a little soap that you could wash off.
Oh, wow.
And they're all handmade soaps. And so the soaps were carved with words that was proposing that was going to remove from us the things that we want to take away. And so my thesis was actually researching cultural capital and consumer capitalism.
Wow.
As far as what elements of fear are created to get us to continue to do certain actions, when in actuality it would be the vulnerability to notice the thing I'm really wanting to remove from myself is my guilt, or I'm really wishing to remove my apathy.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Wow.
Yeah. But that was a community piece, and that you could wash your hands, and then the basin was a clear, like an amber colored fiberglass that as you wash, the water got dirtier and cloudier, and then the shadow underneath would darken. So it took sort of sociological study of people participating that changed it. And
wow.
So some of my pieces have interaction. Others are community based in the collection of the materials, but community is definitely, and interaction is definitely a component that happens throughout my work.
That to me is so exciting. The actual working with the community to create work. I find that so fascinating, and trying to figure out a way of doing it myself. So I'm so excited to be talking to you about that.
Well, with your work, there's definitely like a stitching and a quilting. I can definitely see where like you're bringing together all these different separate like emotions and moments, physically as well as emotionally and mentally.
Yeah. But I'm talking about actually working with other people in gathering the materials for something. How did you first start doing that?
Trying to think of the first ones. I guess the very first ones were the ones in grad school when I was like getting styrofoam peanuts. That was my second year in grad school. Didn't have a whole lot of money. My favorite price is free. And so I just put out an ask. I put notices in the offices and all the offices on the campus that if anybody had something delivered that was in styrofoam peanuts, I was like, if you're going to reuse them, great. But if you're going to just throw them away, let me know. Just give me a call or email me. Email had just gotten started. So there was some emailing. I was like, let me know. I'll come over and pick them up. And so I collected all these styrofoam peanuts from the different shippers that would, send things to the bookstores or anything on campus. And then I would glue those together into sculptural form. So it started with that kind of collection.
Okay.
As far as asking. But then whenever I got later on to like the CDs and DVDs, just knowing that I was like, I can't collect, I was like, my collection is not enough.
Yeah, I have seen all your installations on your website. There's no way anyone's collection would be enough. One person.
And so with that one, with the very first one of those, I was in 2009, and I basically put out an ask on Facebook and across the college I was teaching at the time, just asking people for help. But it actually started before then. I was collecting plastic bottles.
Oh.
To make this other sculpture that was, I taught at Hanover College back then. I was teaching there in 2001 until 2015. So I was there for 14 years.
Yeah.
And got to know the community really well. They're very, very dear place. I'm going to actually be going back to that community this summer to do a sculpture for Madison.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Outdoor sculpture. And so staying connected is definitely something I believe in. But I was making this water bottle sculpture because they had a Rivers Foundation that was about water. And so thinking about that foundation, I was building this sculpture out of water bottles. It was not working well. It was not attractive. effective. It was, but I was determined. I had this deadline for this exhibition opportunity, and people would drop off plastic bottles. So I just put a call out for everybody's water bottles. It's like, instead of like recycling, because you're never quite sure if it's actually going to get recycled anyway.
Yep.
Definitely, rather than throwing them away, I was like, I will pick them up, bring them by my house.
So
And I
were
lived
you
on.
transforming the water bottles in some way, or were you attaching them to each other?
I was attaching them to each other. So I was like basically sewing them together. So I would flatten them out, and then kind of like what I do with the CDs, but the form, I couldn't get the form to like merge them together. You couldn't get past the plastic bottles.
Yeah.
And so it was just not working. And one of my colleagues, she was an economics professor. Her name's Nazarene. She came to my house and brought a bag of plastic bottles. And she's like, here, these are for your sculpture. Would you also like these? And she hands me this box of all these CDs. And she's like, nobody will recycle them. You cannot recycle them. And she's like, unless you send them to Terre Haute, Indiana. And we're in Indiana. I was teaching at Hanover College in Southern Indiana. I was like, I was remembering, why Indiana? I was like, why Terre Haute? So I logged that away. And like I mentioned, my favorite price is free. So I said, yes, take the CDs. And I go back to the sculpture. I'm flattening the bottles, adding them to it. And I just keep looking at this not attractive sculpture. That is just not, like, I'm fighting it. And I look over, and there's these shiny box of CDs, and those are kind of pretty. And so, no, focus. I'm working on this piece. And so finally I go and pick up the CD. I was like, okay, fine. What are you about? And I started just doing research in the history of the CD, just the research and development. Where did the CD get invented? How many years of process did it go through to be able to be functional? How many engineers were, how are they made? Where are the materials from? And then I figured out
in the early 2000s.
This would have been 2009.
So CDs are still pretty popular at that time.
Yes, they're still pretty popular because they came out in 83, 82, 83 was when they first started.
Mm-hmm. I think I was still listening to cassette tapes at that time.
Well, they had just come out, so nobody had really many CD players. I would think I was like in the second grade or third grade when they came out. So it wasn't until I was like closer like to high school that people all have CD players regularly. Because before then it was like magic. Yeah. Like the way that they worked, with a cassette, you see the tape and you can use your pencil, I'll rewind it a little bit.
Yeah.
With a VHS, you can see, where it is. With a record, you have the ridges, where it is. But with a CD, you put it in this little shelf in this drawer, and then it hides.
Right. And magically just playing things.
So like the way it works is fascinating. But then for me at the time in my little town, conceptually, something that I was struggling with in my adolescence was when it comes to cultural capital, how do you understand what's in? What are these ideas of like, what is society, and how is like that an approved way to be versus this? Like, how does a band get known? How does a clique form? Like, I was just mystified. Like, all these other people knew that these things happen. And I'm trying so hard to catch up. Is what it felt like. It always just felt like I was trying to fit in.
I think I'm with you there. I totally remember feeling that way. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
What? Like how? What? Why am I always on the outside? I'm always too late.
I'm always too late. Like, I'm like, yesterday I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, I remember when I learned that there's this thing called slumber parties, and that they've been happening, and obviously I hadn't been invited. But my family's culture, my dad's from the Philippines, my mom's from the US, but they didn't necessarily have those practices within their households.
We didn't either. So
yeah, I was like, there's what?
I only experienced slumber parties when my daughters were old enough to go to slumber parties.
Yeah.
I was like, I never did this.
Yeah, we didn't have these. But like all kinds of things like that, like trying to make sense out of what might be for one culture automatic. And like, how do we learn those things? Seemed like it seemed at the time as a child kind of magic that people seem to, understand these things that are passed down. But I was like, how does that translate whenever somebody isn't from that group? Yeah. How do we communicate? But how do we include? And so I've always been, for a long time, I've been sort of fascinated, but also struggled with that. So the CD, in a way, both physically as what it was about, like the way it's made, human ingenuity to design this thing that communicates and shares knowledge. But then this other part where it's also whether or not a CD, whether or not an album makes it to the top 40. A movie gets an Emmy nod or an Oscar nod,
Right.
like all of those things. There's this other component of magic and understanding and network that the CD and the DVD represent for me. And then there's this last part, which is what happens when our fickle society says we don't want you anymore, right? Whether it's because the media is no longer wanted or it's no longer your favorite song. And so when we don't want it in our fickle society, we just throw it away. We let it go. It yields all those landfills. And so those three things, as I was doing that research with that shiny box of unwanted discs, I was like, I can work with that. I was like, that's like hitting three different areas of personal interest.
Right.
I was like,
no, there's a lot underneath there. A humbled CD. Go figure, right?
Right? Out of this thing. But then I was like, how do you make art with this thing? I was like, nobody ever taught me how to make artwork with a CD. I invented like 40 ways not to make art with a CD. That looks stupid. Right. I was just struggling, problem solving. Like I was saying, like I liked tinkering when I was a kid. So problem solving. And
so
I found
right up your alley.
Yes. So it answered like different levels of like gratification and maybe some personal dopamine.
So what were some of the things that you tried that didn't work for you?
Stitching them to another material. So like having a substrate like fabric, stitching them to fabric. So I'd have to drill a hole in those or just stitch around the hole that was already in there. They just look like really bad sequins. Right.
Well, they crack.
And then they would crack because
I've tried putting a needle through one and it just cracks.
Yeah. So that didn't work. And then I tried it. Think of Ellen Swee's work, the way that he uses pieces of metal from the tops of like liquor bottles and flats those. He then has a hole punch in each. I was like, I wonder if I could use something like that. So I drilled holes in like 4 edges. And then I would like do little ties and I made a square of that. But then all it would take is one CD to break. And then I'd have to sit there and untie all 4 spots. That ain't gonna work.
Yeah.
And then but then there's also all these gaps and I couldn't control the form. And so I was like, and then I tried it where I just had like one string going down the center, stitching those. So came up with 40 ways not to make art out of a CD. But then all right,
so now I have to ask, how do you attach them now?
There are 2 primary things that I do. Like the one that's in the show that we're in together in Chelsea, that one is probably my primary way of doing it, which is each CD has 4 holes drilled in it. And it's like a specific distance apart and edge from the edge of the CD that allows for the most strength for the longevity of the sculpture, while at the same time is not as fragile. Like if the hole gets too close to the edge, it breaks too easily. And then how many CDs can you drill holes in at the same time? So like all of these little components. And so once I have them all drilled, they're basically just sewn together with fishing line with the monofilament.
Oh, okay.
So it's a 50-pound test line. And so that way it's pretty thick and it has memory. So it's plastic itself. And I'm 5 feet tall. And so 2 wingspans is 10 feet. And so that's the way I measure. And so physical, like I was saying earlier. So I was like, this is how long, because when I'm installing, that's how much I can really control and see.
Right.
And so the CD lengths start at 5 feet, which is 10 CDs. And so I stitch together.
Do you make strings of CDs or do you make a 10 by 10, like a square of CDs?
Majority of the time I make a strand. And so I make a string of CDs. It's kind of like back in the day when you might have like strung together popcorn for a Christmas tree. So I make strands and then majority of them start approximately at 10 CDs long. But whenever I make these sculptures, I'll break a strand. Like all it takes is me to drop it from the top of a ladder and but it's okay. No, it's not. So what I do is I'll cut out that middle CD that broke. And now I have 5 CD strands.
Right.
So whenever I showed up at Chelsea Gallery or any of the shows, then all of the CDs are in pre-sewn together in boxes based on length. And
Ah,
so
okay.
one box is like 3 CDs to 5 CDs long. So it's like 3 CDs together or 5 CDs all strung together. It's shorts. Those are called shorts. And then there's the medium box, which are like the
Got
6, 9s. And then
right.
there's the long box, which are the 10 plus. And
And
so what I'm
then
saying,
you
I
have to
then
build you sorry, go ahead. No, so then you build a frame and
Mhm.
you attach those CDs to the frame. How do you attach and it's a wooden frame, which sort of
It depends
varies
on the
most of the
site.
time? Hmm?
It depends on the site and the logistics for the piece. So the one that you saw was, yes, it was built majority of it's an exoskeleton of a wood structure.
Mhm. And then how do you attach those strings of CDs to the wood of the structure?
Absolutely. So that was also another like problem solving thing. I just walked around like a hardware store for probably like 2 hours back in 2009 on the start. I'm like holding a CD. I'm like, how do I attach this? And so after more trial and error, it's now a 1 inch fender washer with an 1/8 inch hole. So it's a specific kind of washer that's about the size of a quarter.
Okay. I don't know.
And
Fender
then
washer. What the heck is a
yeah,
fender
I know,
washer?
right? Like, what's that for? But it's the right size and it's silver and it covers that spot. And so I bought many of those and
Mhm.
then little screws that are machine screws. So they have a pan head, rounded top.
Oh, okay.
I screw those into the wood. So anytime that one of the CDs crosses a wood beam, it gets
Uh-huh.
a fender washer and a screw. And
Oh,
so it starts with one and then it might end with one, but anywhere it crosses, it gets one. So that helps deem
gotcha.
the shape.
Ah.
And then to help hold those together from the backside is cable ties that,
Ah.
and so like as I put the CDs together, it's a basket weave. So like an under over. So I
Mhm.
push the CDs around so that way it tapers together and it
Mhm.
becomes a fabric.
Wow. It does
Yeah.
look like fabric. Like I think when I delivered my work, that frame was just being built.
I remember.
Ooh, this is interesting. What will this be? But I didn't like do any research or look at anything. So when I walked in at the opening, I was like, oh my God.
You're like, that is not what I expected.
Well, it wasn't that. I wasn't expecting anything. I kind of left myself
Oh.
open to what it was, but it was still like you walk in and it's a wormhole. What
Mhm.
is going on here? It's
Excellent. Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
it was really amazing. So
thank
for
you.
that specific piece, where did all the CDs come from?
Some of them actually date back to the very first installation.
Ah,
I,
so
I
reuse at
remember.
its best.
Yep. So I'm really like devoted to the reuse of the material, and so as I work with them each show, I collect more CDs. People at this point ship them. They show up at my house, at my office, because once people figure out, oh, this is where I could send them. But I have some collection components that are truly dear to my heart, where like someone particularly had a fascinating story that yielded a big donation.
Oh.
Anymore, a lot of it is when someone passes away, unfortunately,
Mhm.
and as a family member inherited this like huge collection, and they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I try to rehome as many of them as I can, but then also a lot of times people are just donating to me all their old burned CDs and DVDs that no longer work.
Oh, that's true.
They're so
Yeah.
scratched. Yeah, and so they show up at libraries when they're deaccessioning their DVD collections that nobody's checking out anymore.
Yeah.
I had like 20 copies of Nancy Drew the movie. Nobody needs that. So
No.
no problem drilling holes in the yeah. And so so a variety of things come in, but sometimes some of them are very special donations. Other times they're just sort of like fascinating, like Sony. Oh, back to the reason for Terre Haute. So the reason Terre Haute, Indiana will recycle CDs, that is the headquarters of Sony in the US. And
Oh.
Sony Industry are the ones that developed the CD. They invented the CD like through their research and development offices
Uh-huh.
in departments. The first place that they were pressed was in Japan, Sony headquarters in Japan. Second was in Terre Haute. And so that's why. So I did an installation for Indiana, because Indiana being basically the US site for the CD in the 80s, the State Museum there was celebrating the bicentennial of the state, the 200th birthday of the state. They asked me to do an installation for it because they owned one of the CDs that was the first 100 ever pressed.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Huh.
Right? So they put that in one of the shows, and they asked me to do an installation. And Sony donated several thousand discs that were miscut, so they didn't have anything on them, but they were going to have to be like recycled anyway. And so they don't have any memory, but they still, for me, have memory because they have the memory of the invention of it.
Yeah.
Potential, but the fact that they didn't work, and so they're in the show too. So some of the ones that are in Chelsea, I came across them where these I can tell which ones they are. There's this one donation that shows up a lot. They're all yellow.
Oh, interesting.
It's an album. It's a single, and so I still have some that that I haven't burned. I haven't cut holes into, but it was someone who had cut a single. And they jewel cased it. They had lyrics, everything. And unfortunately, they passed away before they sold any.
Oh,
yeah. And so I have like 7,000 of the same CD.
Oh my God. Wow.
And so how can I give someone like that honor, respect? And so I weave their story into the story with all the other ones. It's also about the material. And so I don't want, rather than somebody taking on those things that are no longer wanted or don't have a home and throwing them away, I put them into these collections.
Yeah, that's so cool. So did you ever listen to that song?
I did. It's a rap album. And so I haven't ever quite figured out the right sculpture to build that's only made out of those, but I like using the value color. Like it's a really bright yellow. So I'm basically painting with CDs as the brushstroke when I make these. So on the back side, I'll use the yellow ones and draw this like long line through it.
And because you usually use the silvery side all on one side, and then the colors are all on the other side.
Correct.
Yeah, that's so cool. So I think somewhere I have a collection of CDs that my dad had burnt for him. Like there was movies that he wanted. So I'm originally from the Soviet Union. So my parents, well, my mom's still here, but they wanted to listen to everything, to watch movies in Russian. I mean, they watched movies in English too. Their English wasn't bad. But there was a whole bunch of movies that my dad had some guy copy for him onto CDs, and with his handwriting, it's written on there what the movie is or a TV series or something like that. And I think my mom still has them. So when she's done with them, which I think she's done with them, I'll send them to you.
That would be amazing. Yes, please. Yes, please. Because, it's like one of those things, like if they're not going to be used anymore. And so I will not drill holes in ones that I know will still have life. And I'll either find homes for them or I'll use them myself. Just, until they're to the point that they're scratched and they can't be used. But AOL discs, I have no problem drilling holes in those things.
Yeah, no, I remember. Yeah, I think I threw them out, or no, I gave them to somebody. There was somebody who was working. They were somehow removing the paint on one side of the CD, and it was becoming clear, and they were using something like a stained glass type of project. So I think I gave a bunch of like HP CDs or whatever to her or something like that. So, the CDs come to you sometimes in that little clamshell container. Would you do anything with that clamshell?
I have in the past. I've done some sculptures out of those. Sometimes I've reused them in different ways. But they don't always, but sometimes they come like that. Sometimes I'll get donated, like somebody finds it at Goodwill or like in like thrown away, like one of those cases that we used to have. But like where they're all in the little envelope. So I have several of those too.
Yeah, I think I still have one of those. I don't think it's been opened in probably close to 10 years.
Exactly. Well, I don't even have I think Yeah, I don't even have a player right now. And so
Yeah, I don't have a player now either. I was for a while, I had like one of those little players that my daughters used to like when we traveled way back when. They would
uh-huh.
be, in the back seat with one of those players and their little CDs. Oh, and that's where that little disc thing was with the mini CDs pockets.
Mm-hmm.
So I still had one of those players just up until about 2 years ago, and I would, do an exercise CD through one of those every now and then.
Yeah,
But even
yeah.
that just died one day, so no CD player here either.
Right. Well, then as people move, and you can only fit so many things in that moving truck. Like, how do you make those choices? And if you've already downloaded all the music to your computer, or if you have an account with a streaming company for listening or to watching movies, you might not need the things
No.
anymore.
No, when we moved 2.5 years ago from what was my daughter's childhood home, they couldn't let go of their kids' movies on CDs. So there's
Yeah.
a box in storage, a pretty sizable box, I would say, with all their movies. And I was kind of like, when was the last time you watched this? Are you ever gonna watch it?
Are
No, we
you
can't let these go. Okay. So a couple
right?
of
Well,
more years
that's
in
what
storage, I'll send it to you.
There you go. But that's what I think is fascinating, the way that we as humans do that. We apply emotion to the object. And so
Yeah.
that, object ontology, I think a lot about. And so I keep that when I weave the sculptures, those memories are with me
Yeah.
as I basically am making a really large, like you said, fabric. I'm making a really large contemporary quilt that is combining all of those different layers of invention, all the sound engineers, all, when it comes to movies, you think about all the credits of the people involved in making it. All of that is in there is the way I think about it.
True. Yeah.
But then whenever I build any of those, I break hundreds of CDs in a show.
Oh,
And so I
wow.
collect I
Really?
collect all, yeah, I collect all the fragments though.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Oh, I saw you had some small sculptures. Right, right.
mhm.
Tell me about those.
So I make little fragment sculptures. I call them CD fragments. And so I have boxes at home of the new CDs that have been donated that I haven't drilled holes into yet, that haven't been woven. And then I have boxes of the ones that have already been woven that are ready for the next show.
Mhm.
And then I have boxes of these broken fragments. And so every so often I'll sit down and I basically hand cut all of those little sections. And I think I'm funny. You can disagree later. But I'm always, as I'm going through all the fragments, I'm looking for inspiration and
Okay.
to be inspired by the material itself. And so sometimes it might be a lyric or a word on it, an image will inspire the design and the title of the piece. So one of the pieces that's there is at Chelsea Gallery is titled Half-Life. So I
Uh-huh.
found the CD. I don't know what was on it. Maybe one of my studio assistants listened to. I have no idea what is on the thing, but it said Half-Life, and it was like cut. It was like broken in half. I was like,
Mhm.
that's kind of nice. So that whole piece is all slices, like it looks like it's a sheer cut of
Right.
CDs. So each one, right, by hand, and then they're adhered together. So sometimes I glue those together. Sometimes I use a plastic welder to weld them together. And so it just
Oh,
depends
wow.
on what the design's going to be.
Uh-huh. What kind of
But that's
glue?
how. What's that?
What kind of glue holds
It's
CDs together?
my favorite one is a construction adhesive. That's a clear construction adhesive that has about a 30-second tack. So I have 30 seconds to move it around.
Oh,
And
wow.
then, yeah, and then it cures in 30 minutes. So I keep it clamped like a
Uh-huh.
few pieces together and then I just keep building.
Oh, wow.
I go through material tests. And so if I'm gluing CDs together, and I have a new adhesive, I'll like try it on CDs and I'll try gluing a CD to a piece of wood and I do a lot of AstroTurf pieces too. So I'll
Yeah,
glue
tell me about that. Is that what's hanging behind you?
yeah, this piece is AstroTurf on tarp.
Oh, wow. So, okay, where do you get AstroTurf?
Uh, in a different way, I still work with collecting from other people.
Okay.
And so I have a running collection where I work with companies after they have installed like someone's new front yard or a new hotel lobby area
Uh-huh.
entrance that's out of AstroTurf, putt. And so whenever they're done, they have these like weird like sections that they can't do, like similar to carpets. I also
Yeah.
sometimes collect carpet
Oh,
swatches that are left
how
over.
big is your studio or home or storage
Um,
facility?
this is my studio at my university. So I am a very fortunate human. I'm grateful. I teach at University of Oklahoma.
Mhm.
So they've supported my research and my scholarship through a studio space. So some of my materials are here, other parts are at home. But I often joke like the line between a sculptor and a hoarder is a very, very tiny line. But I have to be selective about what I hoard. And so I collect AstroTurf. So I work with those companies like after they're done, instead of it going into the trash in a landfill, they give me the pieces, and
That's
then
awesome. Yeah,
build
because
them out of that.
AstroTurf, I've been following online all these AstroTurf wars, so to speak. Like it's so bad for the athletes that play on it and bad for the community as well. There's so many communities fighting against AstroTurf fields. So I'm glad at least you're collecting the remnants and putting them to good use.
I try to like keep as many of them around. I like collaging because you can see like even in this one, there's different color patterns.
Yeah.
And so I like looking for the different ones, and I'll basically paint with those swatches and different thicknesses. And the pieces start out bigger with bigger sections, and then as I cut them down, I use the smaller ones on smaller pieces.
Ah, okay. So you glue them onto some kind of a soft substrate, like a canvas or something?
It depends on the piece. Sometimes it's adhered onto wood. Sometimes it's adhered onto metal. And then sometimes and then like this one, they're sewn onto tarp. So I think of these as runners. I've done a few of those, but I'll show you.
I love that. You have a whole big floor to put things onto.
Right. I
Oh,
could lay
how
things out.
cool.
So this one you can see is spiral. So I was thinking of like patterns in fields, like agriculturally, where they use the for fertilizing and watering. It's basically like a big compass as it spins. And so I was thinking about those patterns of agriculture and ripples, like a ripple effect. And so this is all, it's just 1 inch thick. I can touch the back. It's 1 inch thick of AstroTurf, but instead of it being on its front, I put it on its side. So you can kind of see.
Oh, it's on the side. I see. Oh,
So
wow.
it shifts depending on like how I'm like specifically designing that section. And so this is adhered to wood, and then as they're put into frames.
Wow.
And so it's for that design, I'm just cutting strips, like straight 1 inch strips. And so the strip might be a short or a long, depending on where it is in the piece.
Right.
Versus like that design, it's flat and they're stitched on.
Got it. So when you cut them, I'm sure that there's little tiny remnants of all of that left behind. What happens to those?
Unfortunately, those get thrown away. I know, but
Can't do it all.
I can't do everything with all of the things, micro trash wise. Same thing with the CDs. I try to use as much as I possibly can. And so I think about that when I think about like, okay, well, I didn't save all of it, but that little cute story about the little boy or little kid who's on the beach throwing starfish back into the water. I don't know if you've ever heard that little.
No.
I always think about this when I think about like what's enough, like should I feel it? Because I was raised Catholic. I have enough guilt already streaming through my body. So I have enough. More. I don't need to add more. But that little story that describes like what is it? Why do we keep helping? And so this little boy is on the beach throwing starfish that had come up in the high tide, and they're all on the beach, and there's like hundreds, and he's throwing these starfish back into the water. And somebody's on a walk. This older person stops by and like, you're never going to make a difference. Why? It doesn't matter. You can't save them all. And the little kid looks at the starfish and looks up and says, "It matters to this one." Hurls it. So I think about that as kind of a cute little, like, maybe a little cheesy story, but so I can't save all of the AstroTurf, and maybe I can't fix the world, but I can make at least a small difference and help us see this material and keep it out of the landfill, give it another voice.
Yeah, no, that's exactly true. That's what I always think about too. I can't save every single piece of plastic. I can't pick up every single piece of trash on my walk. But the ones that I do and the ones that I give a second life to, at least I'm doing something.
Yeah, it makes a difference. It makes a difference. Yeah. So
rather than do little things, it adds up to much bigger things.
I totally agree. Yeah. Rather than like, okay, I can't, so I can't help everybody. Does that mean stop helping? No.
Absolutely. No, definitely not. Oh, wow. Oh, this has been absolutely fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
So what do you have, going on in 2025?
Right? The fact that 2025 is just around the corner.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's going to take a minute to learn how to draw that 5 whenever I was explaining the
Yeah.
dates.
Luckily, we don't draw or write too many things these days, so it's not a
Not
problem.
really
It
just
used, you know,
typing
when you
though.
remember when you were in school and you were writing the date on every piece of paper and it took you like a whole
Yes.
month to figure it out.
Right. It took it like a month to get to the use of the, like making that shift. 2025 is already starting to line up to be pretty exciting and busy. I'm grateful for all the opportunities that, I continue to get to be a part of. In addition to collecting materials, I often lovingly joke, I collect collectives.
Ah,
And so the way that we're in plastic, like within Project Vortex, our plastic-based collective, and so that's one dialogue of my work. But I'm also in a 4 other collectives,
oh,
and then I started an archive/collective too. And
oh,
so there's
do
things coming
tell.
up. So the last one, the one that I helped start, a friend of mine, she's a sculptor down in Texas. Her name's Sabine Senf. Sabine and I in 2022 started an archive about wonder. And so
Wonder. Huh.
yeah, about wonder. So the name of the project is 24 Hours of Wonder.
Huh.
Don't be surprised if you get an invitation.
Okay. So, but
And
tell me
so
what is that all about?
it started with an exhibition in Berlin where we applied for this idea and we were accepted. And so what we wanted to do is each person that was invited was to make a record, like a record of time, like what brings wonder to them. And so to make an artwork that was like the shape of a record. So it's 12-inch in diameter circle. So kind of a unique moment.
Mhm.
And then we install them as like clocks in a way. So like there's approximately 12 in a circle.
Mhm.
So the first exhibition had 24 artists. I was in charge of 12 and Sabine got to be in charge of 12 and
Oh,
she
wow.
could do it. So I think I invited 3 people, but like a chain letter, then they got to invite somebody and then they
Oh,
got to
that's
invite
so cool. Chain letters. I think we'll have to explain what a chain letter is.
somebody. Right. I remember getting a few when I was a kid, like actual letters, and then actually taking the time to like handwrite and copy it and send it. Like now we have email versions. But so we like a chain, so we would share that way. Part of this is also based on a friend of mine who teaches up in Detroit, Cheeto Johnson. He came up with the Love Library years ago, and I have an artwork in it. And so longer story. Sorry, there's so many stories.
That's awesome. I love stories. Keep going.
So Cheeto was born in Zimbabwe. His parents were missionaries, and he tells this story. He and I crossed over. I was an undergrad at Notre Dame, a senior when I found my way to sculpture. He was a first-year graduate student in sculpture, and so we overlapped there, and we've been friends ever since. His work is fascinating, but one of the things he does is he creates like these communities, and his experience growing up in Zimbabwe, but being American and then learning how to read while there, one of the first books that he had access to read in English were all these like really bad love novels that people donated. And so this crossover about like learning how to read and also your first entry into like what is like romance are they. And so he then later on turned it into the Love Library. Like, how do we share love? And so he started it off with inviting, I think it was like he invited 20 artists, and then we could each invite one person. So the first show had 40 artists, and you had to make a book that was a sculpture or an artwork about love. And I just remember being like, what? But I made this piece. I still, so he owns it. It's in his archive. And each time he would have a show, all of those artists could add to the collection.
Oh, so I have to ask, what did you make?
I made this book. So I found this book at Goodwill or something. It was like this love novel because I followed the directions. I tend to be a rule follower. So I followed the directions. I was like, it had to be the size of a love novel. I was like, well, rather than trying to like build one, I was like, I'll just go get one. And so I got this book and the title was Unforgettable. And I took out, after reading it, it was not very good. After reading it, I took out all the pages and I kept the cover and I changed the pages and I wrote a poem about, I haven't thought about this in a while, but I wrote a poem about learning how to love and questioning indoctrination, thinking about like, how do we learn these things? And so the poem was then typed out. I figured out what the font was for those elementary school books where we learned how to like make a B.
Oh,
the letters. And then I used paper from those primary school like notebooks. That's like that newsprint that has the red and blue lines.
Yep.
So I printed it out through a printer with that font, my poem about like learning how to love. And you could write along with it because there's dashed lines, like you're learning each letter along the way. So each page is a page of the poem. That was then I then rebound the book into that book, learning how to love, and that it was unforgettable. But then I embedded into it, when you opened it up, I'd gotten a greeting card. Somebody had sent me a birthday card, but they'd forgotten my birthday. So it was a belated card. And when you open it up, it sang the word, it's saying unforgettable, the song, but really bad, like digital.
Oh, that's so perfect.
I embedded that in. So when you open the book and you're reading the thing, it's singing to you the song Unforgettable for the title. So that's what I made. I
love
had that. But being in that show with him, and then I was his love librarian at one point. So each time he would have an exhibition, he would bring in a love librarian who would help coordinate it. Each book had a call number. You could go and look it up and you could listen. So you can still listen to it on his website.
That's so awesome.
That was years ago that I was a part of that. So that was still in my head and my heart about like the way that we can, through a exhibition, but also through a growing archive, we can continue to connect stories. So I brought this up to Sabine when we were brainstorming. And so we decided, I was like, well, what if we did our version of that? But it was about, like, we were thinking a lot about time change. And she's from Germany originally. As I mentioned earlier, my family's from the Philippines. And I just know how hard it is sometimes. I have to remember, like, okay, it's 8:00 here, PM. That means it's 8:00 there, AM tomorrow. Okay, I can call now. And so it's like how time is in itself a type of wonder, the way that we like use our watches to, understand like what framework a day has. And so we're talking about that. And that's where the idea of the 24 hours of wonder, but then having it like the love library, each artist gets to make a piece about their like containment of wonder. And then each show that we have, we add 12 more artists a half day. So it grows by a half day at a time.
Oh, I love that. So there's going to be an exhibition of that in 2025?
It's going to be in Stillwater, Oklahoma at Oklahoma State University.
Oh,
and so
very exciting.
We're inviting our next 12 artists to join it, to add to the 36 that we have right now. And then in 2026, the next show of it will be in West Virginia. And we'll be adding another 12. So it'll grow to 48 at that point. And so great. And so you can go to the website and you can read all the bios of all the connections. We have a little map. And so
looking forward to that.
In my spare time, I creating opportunities to show these other artists that I find wonderment in, and also I learn about people I didn't know, because Sabine's network went a different direction. Some of them I know, not all. And so I get to learn about them and now connect with them.
Yeah. Now that's what I love about being just in group exhibitions is
right.
I would have eventually learned about you somewhere else.
And widow.
Yeah. Right. Like it's so exciting to talk to people who are in the same realm, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. Same areas of interest, like with Project Vortex, that brings those of us that like to use and think about material and waste and reuse, brings us together. 24 Hours was less of a connection. It's more about network.
Right.
I'm in this other collective called Land Report Collective.
Wow.
And it's a group of 7 artists, and we all revolve around the idea of land use, and land ownership.
Oh.
And so we come from different directions. There's a few sculptors, there's a painter, there's a drawing-based artist. So we come from different directions, but we're unified by this question about what is land.
So is this an online project or is this a physical exhibition project?
A series of exhibitions. We've been together since 2015 as a group. Or they have been. I was the 6th member, so I joined, and then we have now a 7th member. But we were based in Tennessee, Georgia, me in Oklahoma, Wyoming, and New Mexico. And so we all have different experiences of land. And we're always looking for shows that allow us to sort of challenge each other. And the next show we have coming up is in South Dakota.
And what does a show in South Dakota look like? Like where, how, and what?
And so each one of us are always like sort of like looking for opportunities for the group as a whole. And so you're sort of like the emissary. And then if you get the show, then you're the one responsible for coordinating it. So one of my colleagues in Landport coordinated with the art director at an art center in South Dakota. I've never been to South Dakota, so I'm excited about this.
Yeah, me either.
And so, but then based on that show, the space, the timeline, and then what work we're doing, we don't work as a collective, sort of like Project Vortex, where we're all making our individual work,
Okay.
and then we'll all either ship or deliver our pieces there.
Got
And
it.
so
Okay.
as we show in different cities and across the country, the show changes based on what we're all doing.
Uh-huh.
But this that series of drawings back there that is really special.
Oh, those are your wood drawings, right? Yes, I remember seeing those on your website.
I love drawing on wood. And so I still draw, but I know it's not plastic, but for me, there's still a reuse.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
There was a factory, a furniture factory in Southern Indiana when I lived in Indiana called Tell City. And it was known for this German family chair company that ran for 135 years.
Oh, wow.
And they got hit, unfortunately, by a tornado in the 90s, the building did. And they never quite recovered.
Oh.
And so back about, it was in the teens, like 2012, 2013, somewhere in there, I think it was. The final, like the great grandson of the person who started it, he finally had to sell the building.
Oh.
And he had let go of
where the wood is from?
That's where the wood's from.
That's so cool. I love that. Reclaimed wood.
Exactly. And it was reclaimed wood. That wood was supposed to be a furniture piece. So all the wood that came out of there, he'd already gotten rid of everything else. And he called up myself and a few other artists. He was like, I've already sold off all the equipment and all the furniture. He was like, but I have all this wood left over. He was like, if I don't find homes, I have to burn it before the next company takes over the building.
Right.
He's like, come what you want. And so I got a stack of these boards that were supposed to be like the backs of like cabinets and the bottoms of drawers. I was like, I can work with that.
Yeah.
And so it had a different purpose. And rather than like it becoming just carbon and ash, I used the wood grain as part of the drawing. But I bring this up because Landport, I find our collectives like Project Vortex to be so important, because when we're later in our career, we don't get the challenges that maybe I give my students, where I give them feedback and I challenge them with new approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Once we're farther along in our career, we don't necessarily always get those, sort of challenges. Yeah. And so Landport, I remember during COVID when we were on shutdown, and so nobody's going anywhere. We're all trying to come up with like online exhibitions for our students and for, and we were having a Landport Zoom call. And to this day, Landport, all 7 members have never been in the same room together. Like we've ever, like we only ever get together on Zoom. I think we've had as many as 5 in the same space at one time, like just enough. But we were on this call, and one of my colleagues, his name is Jason Brown. He's in Tennessee. And he was like, we'd gotten all these shows canceled. Landport had a couple of shows coming up and they've been postponed. And we recognized we weren't making work ourselves. Like we were stressed out, trying to figure out what to do with our own kids, with our students. And he challenged the group. He's like, wait a minute. He's like, I've been making all these online shows for my students. He's like, why don't we do one? He's like, all right. And so we decided, we were like, all right, we have this plan. I was like, everybody has 1 month. We have 1 month to make a new artwork about where you are now. And we'll have an online show. And so that's where the very first, the top drawing are these 2 telephones. And so great. I did that drawing. And so for me, it's an inner landscape. So still land, but it's like at that point, COVID shut down, like your landscape changed. It was an world. And so I remember back in the day when I was in middle school, wanting so badly to talk to my friends, and we only had landline phones. Yep. And you had a cord, right? You'd stretch it as far as you could to get a little privacy away from my brothers.
Close the door, the cord stuck in the door.
Yes, exactly. And then, then if the little clip ever broke, it'd fly out. Yes. So that's what that drawing's about, was because at that time, like my daughter's in like the living room trying to like Zoom call her 2nd grade, and I'm trying to like lecture in my classroom, in the next room. So it was, and the Wi-Fi is like struggling to like do all of the things. Yeah. So we were tethered, but we were told to be like 6 feet apart wherever we went. So the drawings are 6 feet apart. The drawings themselves are 8 feet, the whole wall. but the graphite pieces. And so that led to the series of tethered drawings that include like writers and headphone sets.
Oh, I love that.
But so for me, that's still part of Land Report Collective because it's like an
Mhm.
inner landscape and it came out of that group. And so for me, these types of collecting collectives allow me to continue to sort of like continue to question and challenge myself about what's like what direction my work is going.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's overlaps in the work between the different groups, but like I'll show like the plastic pieces, like the AstroTurf with
Mhm.
Land Report. It's still Dialogue of Land, but then they're also kind of part Project Vortex. So.
Right. Like, yeah, they could go either way. No, I think community is essential for not just artists, for anybody, but
For
especially
anybody.
for artists, because we spend so much time in our own studios by ourselves, which
Mm-hmm.
I know not everyone is very good about being by themselves. I'm actually great. I'm perfectly happy to be alone in my studio tinkering and sewing and whatever.
I bet. Yeah.
But
So beautiful.
there's such a great thing to be able to share your work with your, I don't know, what colleagues, compatriots, whatever, people that are just as invested in their work as you are in your work, and then to talk about it. And yeah, I think it's so essential to our humanity.
Absolutely. Well, like your work, I was saying, is like it's just so beautiful, and like I just so appreciate the way that you collage and stitch. Like how many hours? So yeah, you have to be okay with being by yourself, but then like you starting this podcast and then being in group shows. I think we continue to also find inspiration from each other, and validation. Like okay, there's still a need for this. I'm not
Oh yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Oh, we're all crazy together. Either way, it doesn't matter.
Right?
It's all good.
But something that is coming up that I'm excited about, I have a couple more CD sculptures coming. And so all those CDs, they're going to come back from Chelsea. So I recycle all of those strands, plus the
Mhm.
other strands that I had that didn't make it to Chelsea, and they get intermixed with the new strands.
Mhm.
And the next one's going to be in Virginia, in Williamsburg, Virginia,
Ah, yes. Uh-huh.
at the Muscarelli Art Museum. They're renovating the museum, so it's going to be it's a ceiling suspended one.
Ooh, that's cool.
But
Right. So I have
yeah,
to ask a logistical
yeah.
question.
Mhm.
Do you make what do you build the entire installation all by yourself? The CD?
Mm, I can, but anymore, it's just physically as well as time. I can't do all of it myself, so I'm very grateful that I have some support, some teams,
Okay, so you have like an assistant that can help you out? Yeah.
and
And
thanks to
is
my
that
university. Yeah.
oh, thanks to the university. That's great. And like in Chelsea, is somebody else is going to take it all apart for you? Or are you coming back to take it apart and pack it or whatever?
Yes, that's a very good question. So they supposedly, I told them to keep me on speed dial. The amazing staff at the Chelsea Gallery are going to be the ones to take it apart, but a lot of them are involved in putting it together, so they know what it looks like.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. That's great. So they helped you put it together.
And so I had a team there installing, I think any day, I always had at least one person, sometimes up to 4 people who were helping put it up, because that went up in 5 days, 5 short days, because they don't, other spaces will let me stay through the night, but they're no late nights. And so I get kicked out. So the next day, like team on. And so we just like start working really hard. But I have
That's impressive. 5 days. Wow.
that was a fast one, but that's why it's also built the way it was. And so so with each of the shows, I'm kind of a nerd. I basically have a flow chart in a way
Ah.
that helps me decide like what I offer. So if a museum or a gallery wants one of the CD sculptures, the first question, I have like a series of questions. First question is like, can I suspend from your ceiling?
Mm.
If so, how much?
Mhm.
Is it graded for already? Like no matter what, do you have a weight limit? How far apart? Like per square foot, how much weight? And do you require structural engineer seals? Do you have your own seals?
Oh
If you
gosh.
need them done, do I have to do them, and do I have to pay for them? And
Oh
so
wow.
and so then yes or no. And then if they say, oh, we need structural engineering and you have to do it, I'm like, oh, that means no. So we're gonna go to this side of the flow chart instead. And so yes or no. And then like length of time of the show, like how long does this need to stay up? Is it temporary, long-term, or permanent? Then that deems like the structure and how it's built. And then whether or not it can, like how big is your door?
Oh, yeah. If you
Like,
build it offsite.
if I build it offsite, like, so like, how long can I stay there?
Yeah.
Can I stay there? Is the install 4 days? The install 20 days? Is the install kick me out at 5 p.m. or can can we stay until midnight?
Right.
Uh,
Oh, gosh.
yeah, all
Too
of
much
that.
logistics.
It is, but remember I saw, I like to tinker and I like to problem solve. That's part of the problem solving. And so
Yeah.
finding the
Yeah.
right fit for each place. So that's fully site specific,
Yeah.
or at least site sensitive because it matches that location and their needs. So the
Mhm.
one for Muscarelli Art Museum will be an exoskeleton that is made out of aluminum.
Ah.
While because it'll be more, it's long-term / permanent, like it has to be built for a longer amount of time,
Mhm.
while the piece at Chelsea is a short term, so it's all 2x4s that
Right.
can just be unscrewed and the wood can be reused for other things.
Right. Right. So the aluminum exoskeleton, will that be built for you there? And then you
I
just
will,
come with your CDs or?
I'll build it here.
Oh.
And so we'll build it here and then the way that those get built are in sections, almost like think about conduit or like pipe work that runs air in a
Mhm.
house, industrial building. And so it comes in sections
Mhm.
of tubes that are already pre-CD strung, but then it's an exoskeleton. So the tube, the aluminum structure on the outside is taking the actual pressure. The
Mhm.
CD is just acting as a skin on the inside. And so all
So
of
you'll have it built with the CDs in place here
yes.
in
Yes.
there.
In
Over there.
Oklahoma. Yeah, here for me, in Oklahoma. So like about 2/3 of it will be pre-built and then that goes into a moving truck,
Ah.
or my trailer. And then I drive it there.
Mhm.
And then the largest parts, like the bigger horn sections, those are already rolled. They're just not attached. And so then those get attached, hung on site, and then attached to the last tube section, and then that's filled in on site. So
Wow.
there is so there is some weaving that still happens on site, but to keep me from having to be there for a month,
Yeah.
pre-build all of the sections. And so there's a permanent one at the South Bend Museum of Art in Indiana.
Mhm.
That's a 2-horn aluminum one that's in the museum ceiling there. So it's going to be built like that one.
Uh-huh. That's like a whole other level. And that's why I find it so fascinating. So yeah, this podcast is all about me because I want to learn how you do
I
that.
love that. No, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant plan. It's like maybe it's like, the archive of the 24 hours. Like I get to handle, like they're all in those boxes there over there are the crates for the archive. And so I just keep them and they're all packaged. They have like their little, like, all the information's on the outside. And so I get to handle, it's basically, I just get to handle all these people's work that I adore and admire.
Yeah.
And then when I install it, my work is to be next to theirs. So.
Right. Oh, so cool. Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much, Leticia. This has been most fascinating conversation.
Oh, it's been an honor to get to hang out and to share these stories. And I definitely want to continue to learn more about your work as well. Like I said, I just really admire the way that you combine and collage. Yeah, there's just so much sensitivity and visual and emotional depth to your work. And I just really appreciate it. So,
well, we will continue this conversation, I'm quite sure.
Excellent. Excellent. And I hope for more opportunities to get to see you in person.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for joining me for that fascinating conversation. Oh my goodness, so many topics covered. We could have kept going. Thank you so much for listening. Please rate, review, share, follow, like. Please share this podcast with any artist that you think would get a kick out of listening to these conversations. I would deeply appreciate it. And if you want to know more about me, go to artbynatalia.com. If you'd like to learn with me, go to ecoloop.art and see all the offerings that I have for you. Thanks so much. This podcast was created, produced, and edited by me, Natalia Korover. Theme music by R.C. Gaida. Find out more about me at artbynatalia.com. Find out about my community at repurposercollective.com. and about my education initiatives at ecoloop.art. Thank you for listening. Please rate and review and share this podcast with anyone that you think might like it. Thanks so much.